So this workshop is the first in a three-part series that is being held in partnership with Corinna Hartwig, who I will introduce shortly. And this morning's session is all about how to attract funding. So why funders fund, and how to make your community organisation really stand out. So Corinna will start with a bit of a plenary session and going over the kind of current funding environment, why funders fund, how to speak the funders' language to really capture their attention. And this is an interactive session. So at some stage we will be turning our microphones back on and going into breakout rooms to share our kind of knowledge on funding and some ideas using Jam boards. Don't worry about that, we'll explain it all when that comes round. And then we'll come back into the final Q&A, all back in the same room. So before that Q&A, if anyone has any questions through the whole of the session, please write them down in the chat box. And I will be gathering those in the background and bringing them to Corinna at the end of the session. So talking of the chat box, just having a little look, there's Alison from the Backdane Trust in the Peak District, a couple of the Semble team based across Bristol and London. Chris, you are running a gender blind man's shed in Teddington. That's brilliant. A really brilliant bunch of different people in here from across Scotland, Liverpool, East Hertfordshire. Really good to see everybody dropping in. So just to get a little bit more information on the brilliant participants here today, I'm going to send out a poll just to get a bit of a sense of which area of community action you're most interested or involved in. This will just help us to get a better sense of what is going on currently in the world of community action. So do answer that as I keep talking here. So final bits of housekeeping before we move on to kicking off the session. As I said at the beginning, cameras on if you can, microphones off. Do change your name tag by right-clicking on your image, if you can do that, so that we all have our names straight. And use the chat box to ask questions. I'll be gathering those. As I said, we'll be taking those questions to a Q&A at the very end. We are recording this session and we'll be sharing the recording with all of you afterwards. And if you aren't comfortable with that, do leave your cameras off. You can interact using the chat if you're happier with that. So before we get on, it's time for a few intros. I'm Lorna from Semble. There are a few others of the Semble team here today. You might be able to tell by the name tags, and now they're all waving, so you can see them well. We have Chloe and Kia and Perrine and Josie, and you will be meeting one of those brilliant Semblers in one of the breakout rooms later on today. And for those of you who don't know, Semble is an organisation that connects grassroots community-based organisations with big businesses. So we do that to help funnel funding and also volunteers into local communities. And we also build movement building campaigns to try and drive behaviour change from the grassroots up. And if any of you have heard of Backyard Nature or Outdoor Classroom Day, those are two of our movement building campaigns. You can find out more about them and get lots of top tips for funding opportunities and community action and notifications for upcoming community events like this one. If you sign up to our newsletter, if you haven't already, please do that. I will share a link in the chat so that you can access the sign up form for that. We have 2 more events in this series of events coming up. So we will be running Where to Access Funding on the 25th of August, and also Building a Funding Strategy on the 15th of September. I will be sending out, or one of the team will be sending out an email after this session to remind you of those dates, and also to give you a recording of the session and send out any resources that Corinna shares with us. Corinna will be running all 3 of the funding sessions in this series. And for those of you who came to our previous funding session or enjoyed one of the one-to-one funding support sessions that we ran back in, I think it was back in March, a while ago now, Corinna is also known as the funding doctor. You can see from her lab coat there that she is a branded up funding doctor, and Corinna has rich experience in the world of fundraising. She's helped many community organisations to secure funding grants and to build sustainable funding strategies. Corinna's worked for organisations including the Big Lottery Fund, the Plunkett Foundation, and has delivered workshops like this one, as well as online. She's done offline workshops in person before the days of coronavirus. And she's run those not only for Semble, but also the Village SOS, the Big Lunch, Eden Communities, voluntary sector training, and many others. And on top of all of that funding expertise, Corinna is a startup business advisor with personal experience building not only community projects, but also enterprises. So before further ado, I think it's time to dive into some of Corinna's expertise and learn a bit more about funding and how we can secure funding at this moment in time, which is particularly trying and difficult in terms of the funding landscape. And I think Corinna is going to kick off with a bit of an update on where we're at with funding today. So over to you, Corinna.
Thank you. Just give me one moment. Hello, nice to meet you all. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, so bear with me 1 second, please. So here we are. Just 1 second, just need to arrange a little bit my screen here. I still got the poll. I'm going to switch that off for a minute. So, hello and good morning, everyone. Lorna, how many people have we got in the room now?
There are nearly 40 of us, I think.
Wow, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for getting up after a hot, sticky night for some of us. My name is Corinna, and thank you, Lorna, and for the Semble team to having me here today. And especially thank you to the team, because together we pull off quite some good webinars. So hopefully this morning it'll be worth your while coming. So I want to share with you really in more detail my experience as both a volunteer for a successful community project that raised over £95,000, but also in my role as funding officer for the Big Lottery Fund and also for a rural European funding programme. Today I'm going to be talking to you about why funders fund, explain how to speak the funders' language, and how to attract funding successfully. And I'm concentrating on those 3 areas because when I was a volunteer, it was a bit of an eye-opener once we understood, a handful of people, how our what we called our little community project fitted into the wider things, into the wider movements, into the wider world of what's happening out there. And that's what I'd like to share with you today. It's because if I pulled off a successful community project, I know that you too can do it absolutely. So we're going to look at the current funding environment, why funders fund, and speaking the funders' language, and I'm going to use the outcome triangle, which I have adapted from the NCVO. As Lorna said, for those of you who might have missed the introduction, I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we're hoping to kind of take you into smaller group sessions in the Zoom breakout rooms and do a small activity with you to give you the opportunity also to get to know each other, to share your expertise for those who have some, and there's quite a few people who are new to this. This is also for you, and it's all for you to share together. So if you're ready, let's take a look at the current funding environment. So the current funding environment is obviously influenced by a few main factors. Now, the first of one I have represented here with the Stay Alert, Stay Safe poster is obviously COVID, as you all know. Of course, there was an immediate need, and you, really, the community activists and organizations of all sizes have done incredible work in very difficult times. You have come to the forefront to help communities fast and with compassion. Then COVID obviously influenced funders. Most funders suspended or paused their programs, their normal programs, to concentrate on COVID emergency funding only. But slowly, some of the former programs are returning. But the pandemic has also had an effect on their staffing, their focus, and their resources. So you need to bear that in mind as well. This also means that you need to check more often, probably at the moment, what funding is actually currently available, as this might change as we still feel the effects of the pandemic and carry on going through it. Some positive effects, though, from the crisis have been that the funders had to become more flexible and more adaptable, and we have seen many of them changing their criteria. They are now also more open to fund revenue costs than ever, and they want to support you in doing good. Now there's a huge drive and energy out there to support you, the community groups, the positive community action, and associations and organizations, agency, funders, and government are trying to adapt as quickly as they can to help you too. My next image at the top in the middle is a big queue of people queuing up with their face mask up. And of course, the funding environment is also influenced by the need. And as you all know, the need is huge and the need is probably going to grow. But it's absolutely impossible at the moment to foresee the true impact of the pandemic and the need out there, because there was also a need before the pandemic, as you know. The third picture at the top represents the digital shift. So today we're doing things digitally that we didn't think possible a few months ago. We're all here today taking part in this digital event. We're going to go in smaller group sessions in a digital way. All has changed. You have rallied around coordinating and giving support whilst being physically distanced. You're working remotely but part of a team. You have taken part and offered free digital events, remote learning, webinars like this one today to support, unite and inspire. There's also, some of you have organized virtual pub quizzes, virtual events and other digital fundraisers to collect funds that you desperately need. And of course, we communicate even more via social media, email and other electronic means. This means that the way we fundraise, communicate and access funding will also be influenced by this rapid digital transformation, and that's really, really important. In addition, the space is crowded, so that's the little image of the cotton buds at the bottom with one smiling little cotton bud. It's to represent that there's the equivalent to one registered voluntary organization for every 399 people in the UK. That's a statistic from the NCVO Almanac that I'm citing here. This estimate does not include you if you are not a registered organization or charity. So if you kind of unregistered, incorporated, then you are not coming under this kind of umbrella. And there is many more kind of under the radar informal groups that are not counted in these statistics. So the competition is quite high. So what does that mean for you today? It means that you are competing potentially against each other for funding. And fundraising is hard because at local levels, you are competing with the other local organizations, charities, clubs, from the bowling to scouts, from forums, from baby and toddler groups to open space projects, allotments, food growing, energy projects, recycling, upcycling, the food banks, but also now larger national charities. And I think the first time what we've really seen is that a lot of funding has also been given to the NHS from the public as well. So you're actually competing for kind of spare pennies in people's pockets with all of these. So most funders suspended or paused their programs. Oh, sorry, I've told you that. Sorry, that's me. So that means that funding remains highly competitive and oversubscribed due to years of austerity and a growing demand before the current crisis. And of course, I've got a little image of Brexit that is still ahead of us. And it's not really a very rosy picture that I'm describing here, but I want to invite you to continue to be creative and resourceful, because we know that that's what you're good at, and you have just proven it in the last few months. So let's have a little look at what we established in one of our previous workshops. We had a little, I kind of asked the question, what do you think you and funders have in common, in our introduction workshop a few months ago. And we all agreed that you and the funder have three important drivers in common. The first one is do good, the second one is look good, and the third one is feel good. And I'd like to kind of explain to you a little bit more what I mean when I'm kind of making these statements. So when you do good in your community, it makes you feel good. And that's an experience that we need as human beings, and that nourishes us. This good feeling also puts a smile on our faces, which in turn makes us look good. And if we smile and look good, that makes us feel good. So all these three motivators are what you and the funder have in common, and that is really, really powerful. So make the funder your ally, and let me tell you how, step by step, in the next few slides now. So why am I saying do good? Why do funders fund? Well, because they want to do good. That's the first commonality that you and the funder have in common. Funders do not fund for the fun of funding. Funders have an agenda, as they want to see their money doing good and alleviating hardship in the communities. So let's take a closer look at what it means for the funder to do good. Funders have areas of need for which they provide funding, and there are broadly 9 different areas. Obviously, at the moment, COVID is at the top, and I've represented it with the lovely little virus there. Funders implemented as quickly as possible their programs as an emergency response, and any future COVID-related funding will aim to counterbalance the negative effects of COVID and its impact. A second area that we broadly see is the one of food action, and I have represented that by one of the kind of food parcels, or a food box, if you like. That's obviously related to COVID as well. But funders responded with support to delivering food emergency parcels and enabled you to do some of this at grassroots level. But they also have been interested in supporting community farms, food distribution, cooking, community cafes, and all these areas before the crisis. Food is essential, so the likelihood that a lot of support and resources and funding will be provided so that the communities and their most vulnerable members do not lose out. Then thirdly, we have the environment, which I've represented with the poster of the climate emergency. So under environment, we've got climate and green spaces. That includes gardens, parks, biodiversity, possibly allotments, but also sometimes waste and resources, pollution, recycling, energy, and the sharing economy. Another broad area is the fourth area of health and well-being. Mental health, physical health, loneliness and isolation, disability and sport. And I think from the poll, which I glanced at a little bit earlier on, this is one of your top subjects, along with food, and Lorna can maybe share the results of the poll a little bit later when everybody had completed it. Okay, there's still a fifth broad area, which is the economy, sustaining jobs, employment, and economies across the UK. There has been a shift, obviously, through COVID to hyper-local shopping or more online shopping. So there is quite a divide and a shift, and that's quite interesting and quite important to note as well, and funders will probably respond to that as well. Because obviously the impact on hyperlocal shopping and more online shopping has already had an impact on jobs and retail and probably our high streets. So that's something that the funders will keep an eye on and might have to counterbalance with some of the funding that they can provide. But alternative models are needed to build on a newly found community spirit and support community-owned businesses, for example, community shops. Also there's co-ops in social care, cooperatives and so more, and I've represented that with an image of a nice idyllic little community shop in rural areas that have just become vital really for their community, especially in lockdown, but who will be vital as well going forward. The sixth broad area is the digital divide. Also obviously influenced by COVID, but obviously it was on the agenda before. Technology skills and access to data and internet have been super important, but it also in the way we shop, we interact, and we fundraise. And I think that was one of the main issues right at the beginning, or for some organizations to make that switch to digital fundraising. And also for some of us in the community, it means a hard choice between data or dinner. And this has become a real difficult choice to make and a new choice to make. And probably some of us will agree that this shouldn't be a choice that we need to make to feed our families or to get our kids in education. There's the seventh broad area is equality, rights and social cohesion. That has obviously also come to the forefront through Black Lives Matters. That happened, obviously, as you know, shortly after the lockdown. But that's including all the gender equalities, older people, LGBT, refugees, minority, ethnicities, homelessness. So that could all come under this kind of broad seventh area. And very quickly, but I don't want to touch too much. Obviously, we have also an eighth and a ninth area. The eighth is education and training. So education, mentorship, employability, employability skills for the workforce, all of that is there. And obviously there's a massive shift here to distance teaching since March and to kind of acquiring digital skills, but also teaching or running webinars, accessing learning digitally and providing learning digitally. And lastly, but that's not the smallest one because that's one that's dear to my heart as well, is arts and culture, art, music, cultural heritage and libraries. And I'm actually currently working with an arts charity in Essex to help them through COVID, but also to think about the expansion plans that they had just before the lockdown. So you can see there's a lot of broad areas, but hopefully you can understand, or you can see maybe a little bit more under which of those broader areas your project might sit. And obviously the commonality to do good that you and the funder have identified goes across the same areas where things are not quite right in your society and where things could be better, and you have chosen to do something about it. And we really need to applaud you for that. That is why you need to look closely at the funding criteria. So if your project doesn't fit a broader area of doing good for the funder, you have to look for a different funder that covers your broad area of doing good, your area of interest, your area of need. Because interest and need and geography and age group also play a role. So for example, if you're looking to fund a project around healthy food, don't apply to a funder that supports the digital divide. Find a funder that funds food action or health and well-being, perhaps even culture in your area for the age group of the people that you're trying to help. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I'm going to move to the next slide. So the second commonality that I'd like to discuss is why funders look good. And feel free to jot anything in the chat, please, throughout, and Lorna will have a look at your questions, and there is plenty of time after the breakout session or maybe before so that I can address some of the questions you might have. But the second commonality that you and the funder have in common is to look good. Besides the fact that funders love to smile too, believe it or not, when their funding really makes a difference, they also need to look good for other reasons. Let me explain these. The first reason is they distribute often public money or money on behalf of somebody else, and they're accountable for the distribution of it. And I'm kind of talking broadly about grant funding that comes from grants and foundations also, but really for most funders that is the case. So they are always accountable for it, and that's why they're asking you so many detailed questions. The second reason, they need to demonstrate that their funds make a difference. They need to justify internally why your organization should get the funding and not the project down the road. So make their life easy. The third reason, they need to fund to do a maximum of good to a maximum of people, because funds are precious. They have been even more precious since before COVID, with all the recession and savings all across, but now even so more, because obviously a lot more has been diverted to COVID. So you have the due diligence to show them that the money that you're going to get from the funder is going to do the maximum of good to the maximum of people, okay? And that's the third reason to look good for the funder. So these reasons are also often linked to strategies, and your social action is linked to those, and vice versa. Let me explain a little bit more what I mean by that. And I call this the ripple effect, which illustrates the relationships between strategies and funding. And I'm coming to this now. So the reasons why funders fund needs to look good are linked to strategies that can sit at high level, but also at local level. And your social action is linked to these, and vice versa. Very often, areas of need are identified at international level, then at national level, then public money is ring-fenced, more at regional and local level. And then it's ring-fenced even for your possible community, immediate community, and for your projects. So funding pots are then allocated to the regions in order to finally make a difference at community level. And I'm going a little bit more into detail to explain to you what I mean. However, many funders are often remote from the actual areas of need. So if treaties and conventions are set at really high level here, can you see how far your community project is away from them? So that's actually because the funders sometimes are so remote from the grassroots. This is why they need you to make a difference on the ground. And all what you need to do is tell them how you're helping them with their strategic agenda. I'm just going to move to the next slide. And I'm going to go a little bit more into detail. So I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit the ripple effect and the different layers of the strategic levels, if you like. And I know there's a few newcomers to funding here today in the room, but that's absolutely fine. So don't be put off by a certain language. It's really important that you familiarize yourself with that language as well, so that you understand how your community project sits within the wider strategic space. So that's, for example, here is the international and the world level or European Union level. And I'm going to kind of use the example of food poverty to bring the ripple effect to life for you a little bit. And I've just pulled out a poster here from the 4th International Conference on Global Food Security that was planned for June in 2020 in France, but is now postponed to December 2020. And basically it's the 4th International Conference on Global Food Security that addresses the topics of food security. And here comes a bit the interesting words. At all spatial levels, from local to global, and from an interdisciplinary and systemic food systems perspective. It aims to better understand environmental, nutritional, agricultural, demographic, socio-economic, political, technological, and institutional drivers, costs and outcomes on current and future food security. And sorry, with my German accent, I'm finding these words really hard to say in English, and I hope that wasn't too much gobbledygook. But it's really important that you familiarize yourself with some of those words, because the better you understand them, the easier it is for you to show to the funder that they really need you and your project at grassroots level to make a difference. Probably that conference, I would guess, will go online. And just another example here that happened at kind of international level, there was the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2020 report that was published in July. And you can actually watch back some of that report online, and I can pop that in the chat later if you're interested. But all what you basically do, you kind of Google international treaties or international conferences of your area of interest of subject and have a little look what's popping up there if you're interested. Now I'm going to move one level down, and I'm going to pull up the next slide. Now we're coming to national level. So obviously our ministers are going to these international conferences and are informed at international level. Now they're going to bring it back into the country, into the UK. So then it's really important for you to understand who, for example, here I'm still sticking with food, with the example of food, who is going to want to change things for the better at national level for food. So there's obviously the DEFRA, which is Department for Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs. There is also the Food Foundation. There is the National Food Strategy, who has put on a webinar on Hungry for Change, a briefing from Lord Krebs on the final report from the House of Lords Select Committee on Food Poverty, Health and the Environment. You can also Google report on food poverty in the UK 2020, for example. There's also some Human Rights Watch. There's obviously the Trussell Trust, who is under which all the food banks at the moment sit, or the food banks that sit under the Trustful Trust, and that's why I've used the poster there. And there's obviously also a lot of call for change here, because we also know that food is a main issue going forward now into the autumn. But Google it and start to understand what happens at national level, because you kind of need to identify the organizations that you need to listen to, subscribe to their newsletters, follow them on social media, so that you're part of the conversation, and that you kind of you know what's going on. So one level down now, we're coming now to regional level. So once at national level, areas of need have been decided, and often kind of funding is also apportioned, if you like, or bundled to help those areas of need. They are then they go down to the regional level. So that's your county councils, your district councils, who will obviously look after the schools, the older people, people with disabilities, your federations and associations. And in the example here of food, I've just did a screenshot of the food banks, the local food banks near me, where Trustful Trust food banks are, and where people can get hold of food parcels if they need them, and we know that lots of people still need them. And this is also a good exercise to do, who is out there doing something very similar to me in the region, to actually understand who else is out there helping to do some good. But that might be people that you might be competing with in terms of funding, but it might also be organizations that you might want to think about, oh, maybe I need to befriend them and join forces to do more good. Then now I'm coming down more to local level, and this is kind of getting nearer to the heart where you really want to do good. At local level, that's your borough council, your parish councils, again, your food banks and your community action, but really at real community level now here. And that's often defined by geography, by age, by socioeconomic activity, and of course the level of need. So it's really important that you do a little bit of desktop research here as well, to understand how big is the level of need, and I will explain a little bit more in a few minutes as well about the level of need. And finally, though, to come to the ripple effect here, finally, we are where you were coming from. That's your immediate community, and I've just used a photo here of a community shop. So your immediate community is the people you serve, is your beneficiaries, the people you're doing the good for, and you have to really define who those are, because remember, you need to be kind of crystal clear when you're kind of talking to the funder, so make sure you know exactly who they are. And here, just finally, that's your kind of just your project, just represented with a picture of one ready meal that we actually made for our neighbors, because I cooked a little bit more bolognese in the lockdown, and I helped my next door neighbor, who was an elderly lady, and cooked some bolognese for my neighbor across the road, who was poorly. And we just did community action like that. But I think, especially at the moment, it's also important to know who are your community activists, the other ones who are doing things in your communities, and make them your allies, reach out to them and speak together, because together you just have, you stand a better chance, and you can just make more impact. So can you now see how your community project really sits at the center of the power, and how it's kind of pulls everything together as part of the ripple effect? And wow, I mean, that's really powerful. Can you see it? Can you feel it? And when you feel that power, it really puts a smile on your faces. And again, that kind of brings me to the last commonality, which is kind of the feel-good factor. oh, sorry, in a minute. But what I wanted just to show you here, sorry, of course, the interaction from going down from international, world and EU level to your project. I hope I have illustrated that quite clearly, but also how important your project is to feed back to those strategies and inform about the need to the higher levels. Can you see how this interaction is really, really, really crucial? And that's kind of your role. If you can explain to a funder that you understand that those synergies, that kind of that perpetuum, if you like, then you stand a really, really good chance. So only when the two relationships are aligned will you be able to attract funding successfully and make the difference that you really want to make. And we have prepared an activity for you to explore the awareness of your strategies in the breakout room in a little while. But before we go in the breakout room, I've got a few more little tips I want to share with you and talk to you about. Going back to the feel-good factor, just very, very briefly, that what all drives us in doing good is obviously that incredible feeling when you do good, and that hopefully all of you have experienced. I have experienced, and that's why I'm sitting here today talking about funding as a volunteer, because it still moves me. It moves my heart, it's moved my community. It's I've left a little bit of a legacy, if you like. And here I've just kind of showed you, obviously, Captain Tom, who was an inspiration during lockdown as his funding efforts went through the roof for the NHS. But don't forget to tell the funders your good news story too. It's really important to have a good story as part of your funding application that appeals to the funders' emotions too. And check out the Semble's blogs. There's blogs and resources and digital events all around storytelling from Semble. Now, just this little bit now brings me to the end of the ripple effect, and I hope that you understand the ripple effect in terms of strategy, but in terms of power, the power that you have, and the powers of that emotional power that is really, really important as well to convey to the funder. Now, before we go into the breakout room activity, if I can keep your attention for a few more minutes, I would like to talk to you about speaking the funders' language, a little bit about the jargon, because quite a few of you are kind of new to this as well in the room. For those of you who are experts, it might be a bit of a refresher, or maybe I can bring a different fresh angle to it, or make it just kind of very, very simple. But I just wanted to kind of break down a little bit of jargon, but also talk a little bit more about the need and how you can demonstrate the need to the funder. So bear with me, but we're nearly there. Lorna, how am I doing for time?
You're okay, you have a few more minutes.
Okay, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. So, speaking the funder's language, your job is to provide all the relevant information linked to strategies and areas of need, and to demonstrate how your project can help tackle the problem, and that you're ready to go, and that you can be trusted if you want to access funding successfully. So back to my example, really. Let's use this example to make sense of the different specific words that the funder speaks. You come to the funder because you have an idea and you want to cook and distribute nutritional meals. And this is just a picture of some meals that were prepared in America from 4 Square Meals. I'd like to introduce you with this example to a simple tool from the NCVO that will help you with speaking the funder's language clearly and understand what the funding specific jargon means. So back to the example of the section. It's fantastic you have a passion for community and want to cook food and distribute it to people in need, but you find it difficult to find a funder that gives you money for the medium term to cook meals and distribute them. This is because typically funders do not fund activities, the bottom here. Cooking meals and distributing meals are an activity. Funders fund a project or an idea that will solve a problem. Your job is to tell them all about your project and what you're aiming for and what difference your project is going to make for whom and how. So all these elements. And that's where the outcome triangle comes in very handy to break down those ones. Working through the different elements allows you a well thought through project to be presented to a funder. And I'm just going to take you through those elements very briefly. So first of all, in the triangle, you need to kind of listen. You have heard from your community that there is a problem. People told you that in the area they're going hungry, especially children. And you ask a few more questions and you discover that the underlying causes are possibly people living on low incomes with limited access to transport and poor cooking skills, because they can't provide regular nutritious meals, and that's been amplified by COVID. Now, on the outcome triangle, you need to also define the need a little bit more, and you have to kind of do a bit of research. So after listening carefully to your community and doing some research, you have truly identified the problem, and you can now describe in greater detail its true causes. This is called describing the need for your idea, and it complements the problem. The need helps you to describe how big the problem is and on what research your need is based, what research you have done. You will need to find statistics, testimonials, and press clips, for example. Then we are going to talk about the activities, the bottom of the pyramid, that you normally go to the funder to and say, funder, please give me some funding because I want to cook and deliver some food. So these are activities and they are services that you will provide for your community. This section I have called activities, but it also in funding jargon can be called objectives. Okay, so it's very important to understand that your objectives sit at the bottom of the pyramid. The objectives describe your planned areas of work, the goods and products and services that fall within these areas. And very often funders will ask you what outputs you're going to produce. And the outputs, not to be confused with the outcomes, are the amounts and quantities that you're going to produce and deliver. So for example, an output is to produce X amount of meals per day and deliver to X amount of local charities or food banks for free. Okay, or another output would be to source X amount of quality fresh surplus food from supermarket 1, and so forth. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Now, I'd like to talk to you about the top bit. Obviously, after listening to the problem and identifying the need, and knowing what you want to do, you are formulating the aim of your project. And here, for example, is to establish a coordinated approach to addressing food poverty by ensuring local support, resources and facilities are available to those experiencing food poverty. And sometimes it takes a little while to actually formulate your aim. So make sure that you're taking time to really formulate it, but also understand what the higher aim is and how it's different to your activities, okay? Now, a funder still doesn't just fund an aim or your activities or your need or you knowing that there's a problem. Funders fund something very important, what they call outcomes. And this is what the funders typically fund or have especially funded before COVID, and outcome funders especially are funding this. So this is the specific difference that your project is going to make. So let's have a little look at the outcomes here. So a specific outcome, a difference that your project is going to make is more children have access to a balanced meal, less children suffer from malnutrition, increased, so more children, more children have higher energy levels and have better general health, and they have a better concentration and learning. So can you see how formulating those outcomes is really, really important, because that's the positive change that your project is going to bring about. And this is what funders are really interested in funding. So it's really important that you're making them also smart outcomes, okay? So specific, measurable, relevant, and time-bound. And I've just given you a little example here. So a smart outcome, for example, for outcome number 1 could be 30% more children aged 5 to 11 in Hartford have access to one balanced meal a day for 365 days a year, start from September 2020 to September 21. And they're going to be delivered through the food bank. Can you see how specific this now is, and how it's so much clearer for the funder to understand what change you want to bring on? And can you see how clearer it is to the funder to understand now what difference the funding is going to make? So it's really, really important. And finally, there's also the measurement indicators. So you need to kind of tell the funder how many, for example, you have to say how many meals you delivered, so the number of meals, the location of meals, the number of people supported, and the profile of people supported. So age, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, previous history of work could be relevant here, because you want to know whether they actually, if you're saying that children can concentrate better, so you obviously need to measure that before supplying them with nutritious meals and afterwards to see the difference. And one simple analogy for you to really understand as a little tip is to use the analogy of the open door to formulate your outcomes. The door allows you to step from your current grim situation into the newly improved, much better space. And all you need to do is describe what has changed for the better, and these are your outcomes. So use active language like improve, expand, develop, more, better, less. And here you can pull it now all together in your outcome pyramid. So when you have worked through all the different elements, you're coming to the end of your project outcome journey, and you can now review and refine it all the time as well. If you keep the different elements in folders, whether it's an electronic folder or whether it's a hard folder on your desk, you can use the different elements whenever you need them for speaking to the funders, filling in funding applications, without having to think your project through all over again and start from scratch, which just frees up your mind and allows you to focus so much more, because we're all struggling with that at the moment anyway. So when you're ready to fill in any potential funding applications, whether it's simple or a comprehensive one, just keep your elements up to date, and you will also be able to find that the monitoring reports are much easier to complete. And finally, of course, the last word of jargon is the impact, and I'm going back to the ripple effect. Now you can really, really see also how your project at the heart now ripples out into those wider strategic spheres, and the impact is the positive change that your project brings on for more people over a longer period of time. And don't feel like you have to write this all down. We're recording it, so you are very, very welcome to watch it back, and you can slow me down then a little bit. But I wanted to recap very quickly what we've kind of looked at in the last 30 minutes or so, because it is again a whistle-stop tour, but I want to allow for enough time to go into the breakout rooms. So let me just very, very quickly recap before I'm handing over back to Lorna to let you go in the breakout rooms. But we're going to explain in the breakout room sessions what we're going to do there. So a very, very quick recap for me. We looked at the current funding environment and how this has changed dramatically since the pandemic in terms of influencing factors such as the pandemic, increasing demand, changes in technology and political changes yet to come. We looked at why funders fund and what we have in common with them. So 3 things: do good, look good, and feel good. And we dive deeper into understanding the relationship between our project and the strategies. Finally, I took you on the outcome-based project journey, the pyramid, as a simple tool which helps you to reflect on and clarify the connections between the work you deliver and the difference it makes. You can now go on and create a triangle to help you communicate the value of your work to funders and other audiences at any level. And you are now attracting funding as part of a greater movement of positive change. And I hope this has kind of helped you to some extent this morning. So I'm going to come back to the main room and stop sharing my screen. Here we are, I'm back. I hope I haven't sent you to sleep. And I'm handing over to Lorna for a little bit of an activity now, whilst I'm having a sip of tea.
Absolutely, thanks so much for that, Corinna. And I think everyone will be pleased to know that we have the chance to come together now and put some of this, all of this that we've learnt around relationships between your work and wider strategies and your experience of why funders fund. We'll come together in smaller groups and share our knowledge. So you will find yourself shortly in a breakout room with one of the Assemble colleagues that I have in the room, or with Corinna, and they will share a Jamboard that you'll be working from. We have under 20 minutes to do this and time will fly by. I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes left in the breakout room and also when you have a minute left, and we'll come back and kind of share the key learnings from each of the sessions. So I will send you into your sessions now, and I hope everybody has a very successful time in there. Away we go. A little sign should come up on your screen and you enter your breakout room. Is everybody able to do that? Have we had any issues? Move to Morvin, have you had any issues with getting into the breakout room, or would you prefer to stay in the main room? What time are we going to finish them off? 20 minutes from 11 o'clock. It's 20 past. So let's see. We're just waiting for people to get back from the breakout rooms. Got 16 seconds and counting. Great, I think we're all back, back in the main room. I really hope we didn't cut off too many people mid-thread, and that everyone had a chance to share their expertise and experiences in those sessions. Now I'm just going to call on each of Josie, Perrine, Kia, Chloe and Corinna to give just 2 minutes each on one or two of the main points discussed in your sessions. Josie, why don't you go for it and pass it on to the next facilitator after you.
Sure. Yeah, so my breakout room was full of like just incredible groups and a hugely diverse range of people, so it was really great to hear from everyone. The kind of main two things that really came out were people noticing that trends are leading away from kind of national funding or kind of international strategic importance. Sorry, I'm really hot. And actually starting to realize that at the moment the trend is local funding and being hyper local because of COVID. The kind of other side, so kind of trying to prove that your group is both important local and nationally. Then the other kind of area of things is looking at problems getting funding for core costs, which Corinna mentioned is changing at the moment. People are more inclined to it, but really being able to prove that the core costs are essential.
Sounds really great. Thanks for that. Perrine, what was happening in your session?
Good session as well. We've had some good tips actually. So a few different projects as well. Basically, Catherine shared some really good stories actually about a friend getting funding and then kind of noticing that the more funding you get, the more fundable you're getting in a way. So, you know, I guess funding attracts funding in a way. But it does also take a lot of, you know, preparation and time to get funding, and that the jargon actually can be a problem for a lot of people because you're asked to put things simply, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to speak the right language. And another participant shared that actually it's good to pick up the phone in that case, and then good to share, you know, your interest in the project and then ask question. It gives clarity to you. It, you know, puts you kind of on the watch list for the funders as well. So don't hesitate to do this and pick up the phone and ask questions as well.
Brilliant, some real nuggets in there. Kia, over to you.
Yes, really great to chat to everyone and hear a bit about kind of what they've been experiencing recently. I was really struck by what Brendan shared, was just saying that he had found some of the smaller, more informal groups had been much more agile and better at responding to the current crisis than some of the larger groups or larger formal organizations. And that I was just thinking that actually this has been a great kind of time to prove how useful these small grassroots organizations are.
Absolutely. Corinna, you're nodding. And anything from your room that matches that?
Yes, we had a really interesting and diverse group as well. We had a couple of experts. One had worked at international level previously, and one is active at international level for street kids in Nigeria. But we also had permaculture and landscapes. But what really came out was we had a couple of sitting wider out and quite a few sitting very near to local level in the project. And what really was come out is kind of really concentrate on what the funder is funding and make sure that your outcomes are aligned with that. If there aren't, then don't bother, and that's what I would say as well. But also speak to the funder, discuss over the phone. Most of them have helplines, so pick up the phone, speak to them, run your project past them, but listen carefully. If they're saying no, thank you, not at the moment, then let it go and find a different funder. And we had also the discussion around core costs, and I kind of share that a lot of funders have had to adapt because of COVID and are kind of funding a bit more core costs. Traditionally, there weren't funding core costs, so very few. But at the moment, it really needs to be COVID emergency related. So if you want any core costs for future projects or projects you have in the pipeline or that are taking much longer and they're not immediately COVID related, there is little core funding, but come in the second workshop and we will talk about how you can generate income for those, to cover those core costs as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. And last but certainly not least, Chloe, you were also in a room and discussing some of these matters. Do share your key learnings.
Yeah, we also had a really interesting, diverse group of people working on a set of really interesting issues, and I think we could have talked for a lot longer, but the things that came out were, yeah, again, touching on the kind of move to hyperlocal with COVID, and also around, you know, being aware of what's going on at a regional level and who else is working in order to form partnerships, because obviously funding applications are very time consuming, and if you're spending a lot of time for what might be a small amount of funding, that can be quite unsustainable for a project. So the real benefit of being able to partner in order to apply for bigger pots of funding to hit more outcomes and maybe kind of span more funders' priorities was a really useful kind of tip that came out there. And also partnerships in terms of helping to measure outcomes, because sometimes the outcomes that we want to show might be quite subjective. So also working with organisations who might have the ability to measure those, so we don't have to do all of that ourselves, and working together in that way can be really helpful to increase who we can apply for and what we can achieve. I think quite a lot of the projects maybe span different issue areas, the 9 sort of issue areas that we talked about, which is potentially a challenge. One project talked about not fitting into some of the usual streams of funding in the local area, but I think that then can create opportunities. So we have to think imaginatively in terms of like, what wider impacts can this project have around health and well-being, around environmental impacts, etc. So I guess focusing our focus in different ways depending on who we're speaking to with different funders.
Brilliant. That sounds like a rich discussion, and all of those breakout sessions sound like some really useful experiences were shared. Now, we'd left a little bit of time aside originally to go through some of the questions that came up in the chat, but it appears that Corinna's advice was so comprehensive, no questions were asked. So you know, it could be an opportunity to give a few last lessons, but I think rather than squeeze that in here, we'll save that to send a recap in the email that we will be sending out in the next kind of week or so, and we'll be including a recording of the session, Corinna's presentation, and a roundup of the kind of key lessons and key takeaways, as well as a few kind of links so that anyone can follow up and follow Corinna on Corinna's socials and Semble. as well as signing up to kind of Assemble's newsletter to follow some of the funding opportunities that we send out on a monthly basis. Also, we'll be giving you a reminder of the next 2 workshops that Corinna will be running in partnership with us. So that's where to access funding on the 25th of August, that's a lunchtime session, and building a funding strategy on the 15th of September, and that will be a slightly cooler, I hope, evening session. So it's just really left to me to thank Corinna again for sharing her expertise with us here today. And of course, the Assemble facilitators, Perrine, Chloe, Josie and Kier. And for everyone for coming to join us this morning. In the poll that we sent out at the start of the session, we had responses across every single one of the categories, a really wide variety of community projects and organisations coming here today. The majority, interestingly, were working across health and wellbeing and environment and green spaces, but a real mixture, and people from London to Liverpool, from Scotland to Solihull to Stroud. So it's brilliant to have everybody here sharing their knowledge and learning more from Corinna, all about how to really make sure we know why funders fund so that we can gain more funding. Now it's boiling hot in London, and I think it's time for me to go and make myself a nice coffee. Do leave any final thoughts in the chat as you leave us, and it's always nice to see those bits and pieces coming in. Thanking the team for bringing together a really informative session, and thanks is definitely headed to you, Corinna. So thanks all of you for coming today, and I hope everybody has a lovely day ahead. Corinna, would you like to give any last parting words?
I just wanted to say thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for sharing your expertise, or for being newbies as well. And hopefully you all have this kind of feel-good feeling now to take into the day and into your projects. And I see you all back end of August, hopefully a bit cooler as well. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much.